We are in Module 4, which is the Planning Category Grant Essentials. I have a number of staff joining me today. I'd like to welcome John Wood, who is our Division Chief for Preservation Service Incentives, excuse me. And then I have Alex O'Gorman, who's a co-presenter today. He's going to be talking about the National Register requirements of our program. And we can't stop without thanking Shelby Weaver-Splain, who's our Education and Outreach Coordinator. She will also be helping us monitoring the chat today. So before we get started, we have a couple things to talk about with the agenda. I want to give a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Largely, we'll be discussing about sections of the application and how to structure your proposal to best meet that application so you're successful. We will also spend some time talking about the special initiatives that we have for state fiscal year 2024 and 2025, which includes not only the new Pennsylvania statewide historic preservation plan, our certified local government programs and incentives, and of course the America 250 celebration and our special initiative about that particular aspect of our program. We'll also talk a little bit more, if you're lucky enough to get funded, what your expectations are as a grantee, and finally, where to go for help if you really get stuck within this application process. I do want to share that what we will not be talking about is how to actually navigate through our single application for assistance, but I certainly encourage you to look at Module 2 if you've never, if you run into problems, it easily helps you kind of figure out how to navigate from section to section, and more importantly, if you have any trouble at all with uploading attachments or anything like that, we can certainly reach out to the Enterprise Customer Service Center. Here's their number and email address for questions or anything like that. A couple of housekeeping things that you'll certainly want to know as we talk about today. We will be taking a couple breaks throughout the webinar for questions, but you also can use if you have something arises while we're talking, you can use the chat feature to enter a question. If you haven't noticed it, it's a stream along the right-hand side of your bar. To utilize it, there's a speech bubble at the top center of the screen that says chat with a couple lines in it, and that's how you can activate it and you can see it. Please remember, since we're recording this session, what you're typing in the chat will be recorded, but that's also available for everyone in the meeting to see as well. And what easy questions Shelby will answer for us, but otherwise we'll hold them to the large groups as well. So we'll get started. So this, of course, is the planning project category of the Keystone Historic Preservation Grant Program. And this is a little bit different than the construction category. By obvious things, you'd think that if you're actually making a physical change to the building, you would apply into the construction category. But the SHPO and PHMC really noticed that there was a gap in potential funding that really helped non-capital preservation projects. So we sort of built this aspect of our grant program to help with this. So this is our projects, which I'll explain in a little bit, that focus on some of the preparation aspects of good, successful capital projects that might come in a future round of our grant program, but also include some preservation and community initiatives that you wouldn't necessarily see in the capital and aren't eligible in the construction category part of our program. These do use a slightly different application, so if you are interested in the planning grant, make sure that you're opening the correct one in ESA. And for the most part, this accounts for about 1/3 of the total number of applications that we receive annually. For the most part, this was developed to increase stewardship, and we still very much encourage applicants who are considering a construction category grant to utilize this portion of our program to sort of build the plans and specifications or assessments that might be needed to make a successful future construction grant. But it also funds some other really interesting community preservation programs, either cultural resource survey or even design guidelines within a historic district if you're interested in those types of projects. Key elements of the grant program, of course, it has to be associated with a building or site that's listed in the National Register of Historic Places. And it uses a lot of the same aspects of our construction category. So you'll notice that they require a 50-50 cash match, but the grant awards are slightly smaller. So you can make a request from $5,000 to $25,000, but because of that cash match, if you're asking for $25,000, your project has to be at least $50,000 or more. Remember, these are reimbursable grants rather than direct awards, so you won't receive your money upfront, but instead you'd be applying for reimbursements as you assume expenses. So things that this A category of grants funds are things like National Register nominations, archaeological projects, both planning projects that deal with the stewardship of a particular building, or planning projects that are community-based, much like a design guideline or a preservation plan for a borough or township, or even if you're a county and it's the portion of your county comprehensive plan that might have a historic preservation category. We also see a lot of applications that include cultural resource survey. One thing to keep in mind, these are meant to be used to be hiring a consultant who has a skill set that your internal staff does not have. So unfortunately, existing staff salaries are not eligible to be noted for grant funding or considered could be counted as your required match for the grant. You can certainly include those in the budget, but just remember they'd have to be over and above what your grant amount is. And one final reminder, if you are making a physical change to the building, you need to make sure that you're applying in the construction category instead of this particular grant program. And these grants are certainly available for nonprofit organizations and municipal governments. And remember, our enabling legislation does require that if you're a nonprofit, that you've been in existence for at least 5 years. I'm trying to think of anything else I can remember about that. But if you're a fledgling organization, have a really important project that you want to get started right away, you can work with someone who would be your fiscal sponsor. We certainly allow that. You will also notice that there's a question within the application that asks about visitation requirements. That's more germane to the construction category. If you watched the webinar yesterday, you remember that for the rule of thumb that properties had to be open at least 100 days of year. We do ask for visitation. It might not be germane to your question, and you'll notice that it's not a required question in this category of grants. So we will talk a little bit about some of the building a successful application. And one of the first things is talking about the historic building or the National Register requirement or National Register, National Register nominations if this is a particular grant category that you're interested in applying for. So I'll turn the presentation over to my colleague, Alex.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here with us today. So I'm just going to go over just some quick National Register, I guess, protocols or anything. So really the priority for there's really a priority in this planning construction grant for historic districts over individual property nominations due to increased impact. Historic districts just have much more of a potential to do much greater things in communities than one building, sadly, sometimes. We will accept requests to list individual properties, but applicants are required to make a very strong case for support as to why it's a good use of Commonwealth funds and will further preservation of a resource if it is an individual resource. Next slide, please. I believe this goes back to Karen, I think.
Karen, you're muted.
Oh, I am. Thank you, Shelby. You're so kind to catch me so quickly. Thank you, Alex. One thing to keep in mind if you're considering a National Register nomination, it is possible to apply for a program that would expand a certain area of significance that might not have been captured in the original documentation. It's certainly one of the key parts of our grant program. We want to expand and have more representation in the National Register program. So perhaps if there was a special overlooked section or area of significance, that's certainly an opportunity that you might consider if you want to apply within the grant program as well. So other things that this category of grants can fund are certainly archaeological projects. They can do a tremendous number of things, like either developing a regional or sensitivity model, or even if you're a historic site that might be considering, a construction of a patio and you want to make sure that you're not interacting with any below ground resources. This is an opportunity as well so that you can make sure that you're avoiding any potential things. We do require that any applications that are coming in as an archaeological investigation do comply with our guidelines for archaeological investigations. I've provided a link here for you as well if you'd like to check into that. Or you can certainly reach out to one of our archaeological staffs to make sure that they, comply with those investigations and guidelines. We also fund building-focused plans. So these would be projects that would assist with your stewardship of your historic buildings, things like historic structures reports or preservation plans, architectural plans and specifications that would certainly be used for a future construction project, and also conditions assessment or even feasibility assessments. One thing to keep in mind, even if you're considering an application in this, make sure that your architect or consultant understands that all projects must comply with the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. We're going to talk about that right now because it might be, actually in a little bit. But it's something that you want to keep in mind. The program also can fund community planning projects, and I highlighted this a little bit earlier, but you can certainly see from my example that Erie recently did a historic preservation plan that was funded through our grant program, but you can also look at cities and boroughs or townships, but also the county plans as well. We do have design guidelines that come in through this, which would help a local historic district manage some of the changes that would come through their Historic and Architectural Review Board. But we do have set guidelines and standards that you'd want to make sure that you are complying with as well. One of the major projects that we also see, as I mentioned before, are cultural resource surveys. So these would be projects that you're even looking thematically or geographically. If you wanted to look at a whole township or borough, you can certainly apply for funding for this. We do require that applicants and grantees are utilizing our PA Share system. There's a whole surveyor suite of tools that help you with data collection, but most importantly, if you're considering a cultural resource survey project, we want to make sure that the data that you are collecting is consistent with our system as well. So it's an excellent opportunity if you wanted to know a little bit more about the historic resources in your community. So you can look to the Keystone planning category for funding for those types of projects as well. So one thing before we wanted to get moving on is talk a little bit about how to approach your project within the application itself. And one of the main parts of the application itself is your project narrative. And although this program funds various different projects, we'll try to winnow those down to the same types of aspects that you would be seeing within the project itself. When you start your project narrative, the first thing we really ask you to do is develop a full project description. And the first thing that would include was, why is your historic resource important? Why are you looking at this project? And actually articulate what is proposed as to be completed. We'll want to know what type of work will be accomplished, what those grant work products will be, and to make sure as you're discussing that you're following solid and sound preservation practices to make sure that you're would be a successful project and a good treatment for the historic preservation, either in your community or for the building itself. So I'm going to turn this back over to talk to Alex again, who will explain a little bit more about how to talk about the historic and cultural significance of the property and how that relates to your National Register listed or eligible resource.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. So yeah, just a couple small dates and just things to be aware of. So just as Karen mentioned, to help direct funding to properties needed the most, our enabling legislation really only focuses funding to historic resources recognized in the National Register program. So only NR eligible and NR listed programs are allowed to apply. And if there is an eligibility evaluation, it must be, if there was a recent evaluation of your building, it must be no more than 5 years old. If it was evaluated more than 5 years ago, we're gonna have to reevaluate. So definitely get in contact with me and I can give you the steps on how to reevaluate a resource. Next slide, please. Just a couple of warnings. These are just associated plaques that may or may not be on your building or buildings that you're interested in associating with. The ones on the left are two examples of local listings, and the ones on the right are some examples of federal listing properties, National Park Service related sites. If your building has one on the right or one on the left, please check regardless in PA Share. We're going to go into that later. Check the resource either way. Not every plaque means that your building 100% is historic. Just putting it out there. Next slide, please. So the eligibility requirements. So first, foremost, just make sure you know if your property is listed and verify that with PA Share. If it is listed, you will have a PA Share resource ID associated with your resource. If it's eligible, you will also have a PA Share resource ID. Again, that can be all found through PA Share, which we're going to go over later in the presentation. If the property hasn't been evaluated and you have no idea what the status is, please contact me immediately. We're going to go over dates in the next slide, but it comes on very quick. And if there is any additional information you need on the DOE requirements that I can't help you with immediately, there's a link within the presentation embedded right there. You click on it, it'll take you to our PDF of what our office would like to see in a DOE nomination and how they would like that to be presented in PA Share. Next slide, please. So big important dates. Please, any information or any information requests or anything you need regarding evaluation of your building, eligibility status, anything DOE related, the questions you may have about the status of your building need to be in by February 3rd. If they are not in by February, questions should actually be before February 3rd, but any documents related to the DOE process need to be in by February 3rd. So we have enough time before the March 3rd deadline to evaluate your property and assess the eligibility of the property. If you get an eligibility request in after February 3rd, you may run the risk of our office finding the property not eligible. And if it is not eligible past the March 3rd deadline, then your project is taken out of the funding requirement. So please contact before February 3rd so we have enough time for the March 3rd deadline. Depending on where you are in the project, the DOE process could be a very important make or break situation. So definitely, if you don't know the status of your building, reach out immediately. And handing it back over to Karen now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. In addition to explaining why your project or the building itself is culturally or historically significant, and I saw some great questions that we'll get to in our break. The next part is really talking about what the scope of work. So when you're talking about what you're planning to do with the project, please make sure that you're very specific about what you're hoping to accomplish with the grant project. For example, if you are listing a National Register nomination, you want to explain all of the parts. Are there a number of resources? Is it a country estate that might have 4 or 5 different buildings in it? Or is it a community building or a community or downtown that's going to be nominated to the National Register? And if that case, you'll want to make sure that you're explaining that you're doing the survey part of it or building the inventory as part of this project, or if it was an earlier phase that was not part of the scope of the grant funded work. We get that question a lot through the deliberation of our grant applications. Also, if you're doing a full historic resource survey, it's helpful to have either a map of the area that's being surveyed or the number of resources that will be captured in the survey. It could be an estimate. It's certainly the point of the survey is to identify them, but it certainly helps us be able to cleanly evaluate your application easily. Again, as I mentioned before, you want to make sure that you're explaining what the expected work products are. If you're doing a feasibility study and you're planning to do sort of an assessment of other similar buildings or businesses in the area or nonprofits in the area, what does that final work product look like? Or a historic structures report. The definition of historic structures reports can be very different depending on consultants. So it's helpful to make sure that we understand what you're hoping to do with the grant project or grant funding. It really makes a long way of making sure that we understand what your needs are, and that's certainly that the grant review panel can understand what your commitment, not only to the building itself, but also that the project meets the Secretary of Interior standards, which is the point of the grant program as well. I mentioned those standards. If you're not familiar with that nomenclature, they're sort of the set of 10 guidelines that are used to identify what a historic building is and the character defining features that make it historically or culturally significant. We do have a link here. If you could think of it, for perhaps the center furnace mansion in State College, its character defining features are its brick windows, its fenestration, its roof line, the association with the furnace itself and its landscape. All of those are very important things, as well as interior features. So as you're planning and if you're applying for a sort of a stewardship type of grant, you want to make sure that any of those projects are certainly taking in account to what those character defining features are, and they're protected as part of your future project. One thing to keep in mind, and we do ask this within the application, our grantees are allowed to pre-select their project team or consultants, depending if you're, for nonprofits, sometimes we understand municipalities will have to take their project out to bid and do it through a competitive RFP process. But if you already know who your project team are, you can certainly include that information within the application. You can share what their credentials are, and including whatever experiences that they have that are either that their understanding of working with PA Share and Surveyor, or their understanding of these preservation guidelines. And you also have the opportunity to include their resumes or CVs that can show that they have similar projects and they've completed that. That would help to make sure that your project is successful as well. We do ask you also to include what preliminary planning that you have that might have scoped to this particular idea for your project, and describe a work schedule for actually completing the project. I mean, I realize you're coming in for a planning assessment, and that's perfectly fine, but it's helpful to understand what other planning aspects you might have done either for your building or for a community. Let's say you're coming in for a county comp plan. Has the community already been surveyed, and then you're building off of, is this the next step of your project to really understand historic buildings or resources in your community? Regarding the schedule, it's always helpful to understand when and what will be completed, and if your project is divided into phases, what those phases might be. If sometimes if you're a busy historical society and during the spring you have tons of school kids coming to visit, obviously you're probably not working very heavily on your project during those dates. You don't want consultants coming in evaluating concrete or your masonry. So it's helpful to understand a little bit what those quiet times might be that might affect your project schedule. And I bring that out very importantly because you'll want to remember that our grant performance period is September 1st of 2025, but you have a whole 24 months to complete your project. So we certainly encourage that it will be finished by September 30th of 2027. So keep that in mind as you're planning and developing your project work schedule. One final thing, we do really encourage and assess if your project has a large community benefit. So you can articulate that not only in the application about who uses your program, if you're a historic museum, if you're a community that's coming in for a planning grant that deals with design guidelines, what other projects do you have there where it shows that people support the history and preservation that's in your community? Or what other organizations are you working with as part of your project? Sometimes we like to see that our program and funding is going to be leveraging additional funding to help your projects. We also like to see initiatives for diversity and inclusion, or just even broadening preservation understanding in your community. And what's nice about that is you're certainly able not only to explain it within your project narrative, but you have the opportunity to include letters of support from organizations or community members who see a lot of value in what you're proposing to be doing. I like to mention that early so you can start thinking now about who to approach for potential letters of support. As you can see from our slide about budgets, we do ask you to prepare a project budget, and the eligible activities would include consultants. We do allow some equipment and supplies and fabrications. Although the program isn't meant to fund complete public and educational programs, you can include some portions of those project costs in here as well that would help be project specific to help further along your project costs. But again, I'll reiterate that salaries of existing staff are not eligible for reimbursement or recognized as matching funds. And I did see one question now that I'll capture now because it was related, and it was talking about volunteer labor. It's wonderful that you have volunteers who will be helping. Unfortunately, they can't count as part of your match because it's not cash. So you can use them and they can be over and above the cash match as part of your project. So that was an excellent question and that caught my attention as we were moving along. We're going to pause for other questions that came in, Shelby, because I saw an awful lot of them. So hopefully Alex and I can get answers for all of you.
Yes, there certainly were some really great questions entered here in the chat. I just want two things before I ask the first question. For those folks who have been joining us over the last 15 minutes, just know that this webinar is being recorded. And we did have a question early on in the chat about the recordings for these webinars, and we will be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who signed up for these webinars, yesterday's and today's. And in that email, you will have links to where you can find these on the PA SHPO playlist of the PHMC YouTube channel. So I did drop that link in the chat if you want to bookmark that. We expect that they'll probably be up there in about a week or so. So, first question. By answering that question, Karen, you got me. I have to move down now in the list here.
It was an excellent question. It caught my attention. Thank you for that.
Sidel asked, can one apply under more than one category? For example, building focused plans and cultural resource survey.
Oh, that's an excellent question. I don't know that we've ever really seen something like that. I mean, we've seen maybe a survey that might be a very specific area. I guess the answer is yes, you could, if your budget allows for that, and there's a strong association for those two types of projects. It's a little out of the normal, but I can imagine you might have a specific reason for wanting to combine them. So there's nothing within the guidelines that would preclude that.
All right, so the next question. Rebecca asks, if we are applying for a county-wide preservation plan in a county that contains a number of listed and eligible resources, how would we discuss that in the application?
That's an excellent question. So again, it only has to have one, but I think the best place to do, because obviously your comp plan will be building off what you already know about these really important and significant resources. And you can list to say we have 5 National Register lists or 2 National Historic Landmarks, and just build off of that, maybe very briefly describe them, and if they're have a nice association with them, or if they're really the backbone of why you wanted to do your county comp plan. But that's an excellent point. Thank you for sharing that.
All right. Kim has asked, if we are not on the National Register, can we apply to be? And she's asking for clarification. Do they have to be on the National Register to apply?
Well, I can go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I don't want to do it. We would just ask that you're eligible for National Register status. So an eligibility requirement is not as rigorous as a National Register requirement. We just the evaluation would just come to our office. We would have 30 days to evaluate it, and then if you're evaluated as eligible, you are eligible for listing in the National Register, which means that's like sort of your application. So if you're eligible, that's all we need. If you're listed, even better. But if you're eligible, that's all we need.
I think her question also was whether or not, if you're applying for a National Register nomination, what might be very helpful is to make sure that we have a current evaluation on that, so that we can make sure that you're following the appropriate boundaries if it's a historic district, or you've really captured the areas of significance that our office sees are significant as well. If it's not something we've looked at recently, you might want to reach out to Alex to make sure we can give you a good assessment to make sure that your consultant understands the areas of significance that would be important for its listing.
All right. Ivana has the next question. Good to see you back here today, Ivana. You had some great questions yesterday. So is it the case that a planning grant could be applied for in one calendar year to scope out a future construction program, and then a construction grant could be applied for in a future calendar year to actually undertake the construction work? Is that a typical sequence of grants, and that they are often related?
Yes, that is a typical sequence, and that's something we very much encourage. It isn't a requirement that you've been funded through the planning category in order to be funded through the construction category, but this is really intended to help build a more competitive construction application for you in a future fiscal year.
All right. Patsy has the next question. The match, is it a cash match? Can it be in kind, and can other grants be used as match?
We don't accept in-kind. We certainly like cash matches, but yes, you can use other grants, organizational funds. If you're using special events that you're securing, ticket prices for your special event, and that's the income that you're deriving from that special event is serving as your match, that's certainly fine. And you don't have to, one question that came up yesterday that hasn't been asked yet, You don't have to have that match fully secured by the time of the application on March 3rd. If you're selected for funding, we would like you to have that in place by January of 2026 so that your project can start right away. Hopefully that helps you. You have ability within the application itself to kind of talk about your fundraising plan, what percentage you already have in hand, where sources you're looking to secure that additional match. Thank you for that.
All right, the next question is there a single Word document that walks us through the application so that we can work offline and then cut and paste?
That's an excellent question. If you'd like a PDF version of the application, simply send me an email. I'm happy to share that with you. The alternative way to do it is you can just, once you open the application itself, you can print a blank version of it and it would get you all of the questions as well.
Okay, the next question, Maria, yes. Alex, if you could drop into the chat your contact information for Maria and others. Alex is, again, the contact for updating your eligible building determination of eligibility or whatever you need to do for that determination. Next question, Mary is asking, can this grant be applied for applying to the National Register?
Yes, you can. We certainly encourage applications that are dealing with the National Register and listing of it, either for individual properties. Admittedly, we sometimes take a little bit more a priority to those that are listing historic districts or more complexes. So yes, that's a possibility. We also accept properties that are already listed in the National Register, but might perhaps want to include the new area of significance or expand or shrink their boundaries depending on what would be necessary for that particular understanding of that historic resource. So thank you for that. That's a good question.
All right, we have another one from Paula. We are a nonprofit trying to restore and preserve a historic church that needs work ASAP to prevent further damage, but we have been in existence for only 2 years. How do we find a fiscal sponsor like you mentioned?
Paula, it might depend on what type of organization that you are. If you are a community arts organization that's moving into this historic church, maybe there is a county-wide similar organization who would be able to serve as your fiscal sponsor. It's sometimes usually an entity that's similar in focus to what you are building, but it's reaching out in your community to find out who would be that sponsor. Some boroughs or townships might be willing to be your fiscal sponsor too, so wherever you're located, you might want to be able to reach out to them as well.
All right, and we have one more question for this break, and then I think we can move on. Hannah is asking, is there contact information for who can confirm if a proposal meets the eligible activities requirements, specifically about a design guideline adjacent project?
Anna, I'm so happy that you asked this question because I forgot to mention in that section that we have staff who serve as community preservation coordinators and would be an excellent resource for this. Certainly you could reach out to Alex or I, but depending on where you're located, you can reach out to Bill Callahan. He's our community preservation coordinator in the western part of the state. If you're more of a central area of the state, you'd want to reach out to Frank Grumbine. And then if you're in the eastern part of the state, our staff there is Megan McNish. And they're always very happy to talk to potential applicants about whether or not your ideas for either a community-focused project, especially design guidelines, really meet the intention. They're a great resource. And Shelby, if she can't find the contact information, we can make sure that we can get that to you. So
already on it. The website, the page on our website will be in the chat momentarily. So I think we can move on, Karen. That was the last question.
Thank you all for those. Okay, so after we just talked about the program or project narrative and the budget, our next section of real questions are one things that come up a lot in what's asked for in our program addenda part of the application. So the first thing, of course, is that PA-Share resource number. That's something that might not be very familiar to you. I'm going to allow Alex to take a few minutes to explain what that is, where to find it, and what to do if you really get stuck, because it's challenging, but we have some helpful guidelines to help you find it.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. So PA Share, it's a really great resource. If anybody out here has not had the experience or chance to experience it yet, definitely use that link in the presentation, which will take you to the landing page. You should really just sign up. There's just ask for basic information. Then you can get onto PA Share, and it's our pretty much our database that tracks every single archaeological above ground building assessment, anything like that, which we will use to find your building and see if it's confirm its NR status. There's a search function that is really has been updated great. It uses keywords now, so it's a lot better than it was previously. If anybody had prior experience with PA Share, very easy to look up resources. It takes data points too. You can put in like Google Maps. Um,
The address.
Coordinates. Yeah. Sorry, I was thinking of coordinates. I've even like done a coordinate search, and coordinates work too if that's how you want to do it. And just a great function overall. And please reach out if you have any trouble navigating the website or interface or anything. We're here to help. And one big important thing for the application, you need your PA Share resource number, not the NRIS number, not the CRGIS number, not the BHP key or any old numbers, anything like that. Just PA Share resource number. Next slide, please. Yeah. This is just a slide just to confirm that we need a recent eligibility evaluation for any historic districts that are coming in for planning grant projects. Again, we'll accept requests to list individual properties, but applicants are required to make a very strong case for support as to why that's a good use for Commonwealth funds. You have a better chance of getting the district that your property is within listed and approved for a planning grant rather than an individual nomination. And thank you very much. It's over to Karen now.
Thanks, Alex. One other thing, if we've confused you a little bit with that PA Share resource number, there is, and if you haven't had a chance to look through module number 2, there's a link here. There is towards the end of it, after talking a little bit about how to navigate the ESA system, I do give a little bit of a tutorial of how to find and navigate PA Share. You can log in as a guest at this point. You're welcome to register as a user as well, but you can use, there's an opportunity to just use the guest feature, and you can search by your address, and that this little module will help you a little bit get you further along in that process. Thanks, Alex. Now, I want to take a few minutes to talk about 3 special initiatives that we have as part of our grant program. One, of course, is our CLG. It's a question within the program addendum. They're asking you to give if you are located in what is known as a certified local government. Pennsylvania has 49 CLGs, and of course there's a link here to our website which shows which of those 49 municipalities participate in this program. And this program is a partnership between the local government itself, our office, and the National Park Service. There are municipalities that really run an effective preservation program, either by having a local ordinance or that way, and they're welcome. We like to encourage participation in our CLG grant CLG program, so we do allow a special consideration for applicants not only who are from the CLG, who actually are the CLG. So if you're a CLG and you're applying, make sure that you identify that you are within that program itself, but also applicants who are located within those CLGs. You don't necessarily have to provide a letter of support. We verify that through the evaluation process, but that's triggered by you actually noticing that you're located in a CLG. So if you are located in one of those 49 municipalities, make sure that you include that you are. That sort of triggers this. If you're interested in the CLG grant program and are really disappointed that your particular municipality does not participate, this might be a nice opportunity to reach out to your elected officials to encourage them to build a multifaceted preservation program that would offer a little bit more of an incentive within our grant program too. I'm going to turn the stage over to Shelby, who will talk a little bit more about our new statewide historic preservation plan, which I know everyone is really excited to hear about.
Thanks,
are.
Karen.
I know they are.
I will say that as Karen and Alex in the presentation today have referred to links in the presentation, you all did receive a copy of the presentation slides in your email reminder that went out earlier this week. And so if you can open that PDF of these slides, those links will be active and take you to where you want to go. We will also send these again when we send out the email in a week or so with the links to the recordings on YouTube. Speaking of links that you actually can't click on the slide right now, the statewide plan link is one. I will drop that in the chat for you, but we do have a new statewide historic preservation plan. This was approved by the National Park Service at the very end of 2024. So this is a plan that is for 10 years. This is active for 10 years. Oh, Lisa, great. That's awesome that it worked from the slide for you. The plan is based a lot on some robust public engagement and surveys and interviews and analysis work that PA SHPO and its partners and our consultant did over the course of 2024. You can find the plan on our website at that link there. I will also drop it in the chat. And the page on the website also includes some other information that you may be interested in or that may help you frame your grant application, such as results from our different surveys, some regional profiles that we have, and some other supporting information. So the reason why we are talking with you about the statewide plan as part of the Keystone Grant webinar is because, Karen, next slide. Is because you will be asked the question in your grant application of how your grant project aligns to Pennsylvania's statewide historic preservation plan. If you have applied for Keystone grants in the past, you were using our previous plan that was called Preservation Happens Here. Do not use that plan again this time. We are asking you to look at our new plan. And this new plan, as you will see, has 3 goals. Each goal has 4 different objectives, and then under each objective are some action items. I didn't include them here just for space, but I wanted to give you an idea of what the plan's goals were and what those objectives were. So you are asked as part of the application to make that connection between your project and this plan. I would encourage you to read through the goals and objectives carefully, and hopefully you can find an action item or an objective that speaks to you pretty clearly. If not, sometimes you do need to think a little outside of the box and be creative. But because the plan is a 10-year plan and it is a statewide plan, it is a little bit more broad than it would be if it were, for example, the PA SHPO work plan. So everyone should be able to find a way to connect their project to our statewide plan. If you have any questions, Karen and I are happy to answer them. Thanks, Karen.
I promise I read it. It's wonderful. And it's really, you got a compliment on the Johnstown photo on the cover, Shelby. So, but there are some great photographs within the whole document too. So, and it was great to talk to our constituents about what they see is very important for the next 10 years of preservation in Pennsylvania. So. One of the other final special initiatives we have for this particular year is the upcoming semi-quincentennial celebration. So if you're not familiar with that word, which is really hard to say it, but I'm learning to say it really well, it's the America 250 celebration that's happening in 2026. Some of us might remember the 1976 bicentennial celebrations that were happening in communities. So we're looking at a new way to look at furthering celebrations and connecting with the public with history that's happening in their communities. And I think some of those bicentennial activities really focused on buildings that were built in 1776 or were around during the Revolutionary War. And what we were really attracted to were some of the field guides and themes that were presented by our partners at the American Association for State and Local History that allowed some of those themes to extend through history up until present, because all of it has made America what it is today. So for this particular round, we wanted to use the celebration as a way to engage our grantees to be part of it and to really talk about the importance of history and civics in their everyday lives. So you'll see a special question related to it, and we're asking each applicant to consider how one of those 5 themes that are suggested by the AASLH, I'm going to get that an acronym right one of these days, and how that program fits into one of those themes. And now if you're, we provided the link, it's a really nice read talking about what those themes are as well. But if you are dying to know what they are, they're unfinished revolutions, the power of place, we the people, the American experiment, and doing history. They're very broad, and hopefully that you'll be able to talk a little bit more about how your project, whether it's surveying a community that's never been surveyed or that was part of maybe activities during the mid-20th century dealing with civil rights, that certainly falls into one of those themes too. It falls in the myriad of things. It's really quite an exciting part of our grant program, and we're excited to hear a little bit more about how you see your project reaching into some of those diverse ideas of the American Revolution. So I think that's a really a great aspect of our program, and we're quite excited to see that this year. So I wanted to sort of close before we get into some of the next meats of our application, is to remind you what some of those attachments that are asked for as part of your application in that program addendum. They're the resumes of your project and personnel. If you have evidence that you wanted to share with us of some of the preliminary planning that you've done, either commitment letters from a foundation, your consultant's estimates as well, you can use those as attachments. And I will always ask for photographs. They really help explain what your project is all about. If it's a building, it's sometimes a little bit easier. You just include a picture of the building, and especially if you're applying for plans and specifications that might help you with ADA accessibility, it's great to include photographs of what some of those barriers are, where you see, the potential ramp of being located. If it's a cultural resource survey, it's helpful to have some streetscape shots of where your resource is going to be done. National Register nomination, a good understanding of what the resource is that's significant and that you went to nominate itself. We also ask you to provide some kind of verification of its National Register status, much like the PA share number. That can be simple as the award letter that you got from the National Park Service when it was certified, the cover sheet of the National Register nomination, or the exported PA share resource page when you found your number. It just helps us to double check. It's one of the main requirements of the grant program. So if perhaps you made a keying error when you typed in the PA share number, we can at least find it this way as well. Again, you're welcome to include letters of support. We highly encourage that, to share how the community or other members of your community at large finds your project to be really important. And again, if you're a nonprofit, we ask you to include some verification that you are a nonprofit. It's usually your IRS letter determining that you are a 501c3 organization. And obviously, if you're a religious affiliated organization or an entity of local government, it's not a required attachment because you won't have such a thing. Do remember that we're not looking for your Pennsylvania state sales tax exemption form at this point. It's really your IRS determination letter that's asked for as that part of the program. If you can't find it, don't worry, I'll ask for it as we're evaluating your application. So we're going to pause for questions again. Shelby, did anything else come in?
Yes, we do have some more questions here. Maria asked, how many goals objectives should we connect to our application? Most people only do one. They find a connection and they kind of hone in on how their project kind of exemplifies or implements that action, but you're certainly welcome if you feel that there are a few that connect with your project, then you are more than welcome to do that. I don't know, Karen, is there a character limit or yes, so there is a space limit. Karen's nodding her head to me that there is a space limit. So you'll need to keep that in mind when you're crafting your response. All right, next question from Jody. We are reevaluating a historic district with 168 properties that was approved by MPS in 2017. Do we need just one PA share resource number or multiple numbers? We are interested in reevaluating the inventory of properties and include a conditions report. Do you have any cautionary advice?
I zoned out there and missed some of that. You'll just need to put one PA share resource number in there, Jody, unless it's a historic district that has a parent number. I'm assuming you're talking about Wilkinsburg, and we can double check that for you, but you can only have space for one resource number, and that's fine. But I think that if you're looking at reevaluating the inventory, you'd want to make sure that you understand the number of resources that you're looking at. Also, maybe making sure your consultant understands how PA Shares Surveyor works when you're adding additional information to an existing resource record. And then including a conditions report. You mean of those particular buildings that you've been surveyed? Maybe this is a good question that we talk offline about, Jody, just to make sure that I fully understand. But those other aspects about completing the resource survey, I think are germane to a lot of people.
All right, next question, Ivana. If our community is not currently a CLG, how can that program or designation be recommended to our community, and what state entity governs that program and process? And she's also wondering how long it takes for a community to be designated as a CLG.
Ivana, I think the length of time largely is dependent on the enthusiasm of your elected officials to participate, but depending on where you're located, the best person in our office to talk to would be our community preservation coordinators. That would be Bill Callahan, Frank Grumbine, or Megan McNish, and they can talk through the process, or we can share a little bit more about how that is, but they would be excellent to talk to your elected officials about what that program entails and why it might be a good fit for their community.
Okay.
What's the space? I was afraid you were going to ask me what the space limit is. I don't remember. It might be 1,000 or 2,000 characters. I think it's 1,000 characters, and that's not words, it's characters.
And then the last question that we have right now is, Sidel, should letters of support from state elected officials be included, or is that support conveyed through other channels?
That's an excellent question. Sadell, we're always enthusiastic that you reach out to your state senator or representative, mainly so that they're aware of the important historic preservation programs that are happening in their district. And it's also nice that they're aware of the Keystone Historic Preservation Grant Program. So we encourage you to have that dialogue and get that letter of support for your application. Don't forget, it's also helpful to include more localized letters of support or entities of support too. But that's an excellent question. We really encourage those dialogues to be happening with your legislators too.
And that is the last question for now, Karen. So why don't we move to the next few slides?
Great, thank you. Well, we're getting close to time, so hopefully we can go through these quickly, but we'll certainly stay on a little bit after the hour to make sure that you have all your questions that have been answered. I know a lot of people ask us what our selection process looks like. We do use an independent peer review panel to make our evaluations and recommendations for funding. These are community members, either preservation architects or municipal officials, both HARB or CLG members, and other statewide preservation programs and consultants. And we try really hard to make sure that there's regional distribution of these folks so that they might have a little bit more knowledge of your historic resource. We share the same information with them that we share with our applicants. They can find the evaluation guidelines. They're shared the grant guidelines too, and we ask them to rank and evaluate them. I think that's a really important aspect of our grant program, is that it's the peer review part of it. These are usually members who had been part of an earlier Keystone grant project that has been completed, and they're asked to come help further our program to the next round. I mentioned that too to make sure sure that you are aware that, to really be able to articulate the importance of your historic resource or describe what you're hoping to do, because it's not Alex or I who might have talked to you or have a better understanding of it, but make sure that it's an outside person. So you should be as clear as possible in understanding that. I know the next question obviously is, what is that evaluation criteria that they use? We ask them to evaluate in 5 different areas. One, of course, is the completeness of the application, whether it's well written and has the required attachments. They also look at some of the preliminary planning that you've done as part of your project to make sure that you've appropriately scoped it and that we'll be able to complete it with the amount that you've asked for in the grant award. They look at the project itself. Does it meet the Secretary of Interior standards? Is it the appropriate preservation treatment if you're looking at something like that? We look at community benefits. So again, those letters of support or what you've articulated in your project narrative about who your partners are or why your project is important in the community is really helpful. And sort of that catch-all of, is it a good waste or a good use, not waste, sorry, use of Commonwealth funds. That was a major slip of the tongue. Pardon me, I didn't mean that at all. Because most of your projects are always very, very valuable to our, and we're very grateful to your projects in our community. So what obviously makes the best and competitive application is you can certainly reach out to myself or Alex if you have questions about your project. If you're just not quite sure if it's a good fit for the program, please reach out to me. I'm happy to be accessible right now to talk about how you're scoping your project. Our community preservation coordinators are just as equally accessible if you have questions that might be more germane to their program areas. We also remember that we receive a lot of applications, so as concise as you can be but complete are also very helpful. We do have very generous character counts, but you can often sort of winnow down what you hope to accomplish concisely within the project narrative. Please make sure that you're really thinking about those requested attachments that you're including. They really do serve a long way, especially photographs. I can't tell you enough that sometimes you're describing what sounds like to be a wonderful resource within the project narrative, but when you get to the photographs and there's not a good representative photograph of the front of the building, or it's sort of lost. I think a lot of magic happens when you can visually see that. So I do encourage good photographs that even show some of the warts. I mean, if you're looking at planning a planning project that would prepare roof specifications because the roof is leaking, it's great to see a photograph of some of the conditions of that of the roof material too, of what you're working with and maybe why it's a challenge and that this project is really important. So we do encourage strong planning documents and ones that include professional consultants' estimates too. And don't forget that some of these, that your methodology is really important for understanding whether or not you've appropriately scoped your project. I will conclude for the most part with what is expected if you are awarded a grant. Just remember that your project start date, we will hear notification in June whether or not you've received award, but your project may not start until the grant performance period, which is September 1st of 2025. You'll be asked to execute a grant contract, and part of that you'll also have to create a state vendor number, which includes ACH payments, so you'll provide your banking information, not to me, don't send me your bank statement. There's a whole process with the state office of the budget to do that, but sometimes it's surprising and there's a lot of back and forth, so don't be surprised if we'll start asking you to do those information. In addition to doing some preliminary research as you prepare your application in PA-Share for that PA-Share resource number, we also utilize this system for as an integrated management program too. So you'll do quarterly reporting and your reimbursement requests through PA-Share, and we'll also ask you to upload final reports and final work products from the grant project. If you're doing National Register nominations, your consultants would be using PA-Share to submit their drafts of their nominations, and if you're doing archaeology, it's the same thing with your consultants would be uploading their final archaeological reports, which have a name that is escaping me. nevertheless, that's what you'd be doing as well. And also, we do, as the grant program, do require a final report that sort of summarizes what was completed. And your last reimbursement was largely held hostage until we received that final report. So just keep that in mind as you're evaluating or considering your cash flow. I've provided a couple helpful links about PA Share, including how to find it, how to reach our help desk, any help materials and tutorials. There's a wealth of information and helpful guidelines, not only to help manage your grant program, but do some of this initial investigations about studying and finding your PA Share resource number. And finally, I'd love to share with you how to find our PHMC website if you don't know it, or how to reach out to Alex or I. And again, our friends at the Enterprise Customer Service Center if you run into problems with the application as well. So we'll hold for more questions if there are any, Shelby. But other than that, thank you so much for joining us today. You've been really a great audience, and I had a lot of really great questions. But what else do we have?
We have one question. So I would say if you have questions, last call to put them into the chat. We have one from Paula. Can video clips be attached as letters of support or as visuals of a building, for example, instead of photographs?
Oh, Paula, that's an excellent question. And I kind of remember that this has come up in the past and the video links do not work well, but that might be a question for our friends at the Enterprise Customer Service Center. I'm almost positive if you embed a link, it doesn't work correctly. But you might be able to you might be able to cut and paste it in. I think that might be a nice workaround.
You don't have any other questions?
Thank you all. We'll hang out for just a few more minutes, or if you've got something that's more of a project or individual project related, please feel free to reach out to me offline. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.